Hello, world. Welcome to PEPtalk, a discussion about building a regenerative economy, sustainable finance, and the stories shaping both. My name's Joe Baker, and I'm joined by my co founder and co host, Amira Alpha.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, I'm Amira Alpha, and we wanted to talk a little bit about, who we are and why we actually started Planet Earth Partners and why we created this Pep Talk series. So before we even get to that, a little bit of background about myself. So I was born and raised in the Gambia, which is in West Africa. It's actually the smallest country on the continent. Growing up there gave me a very unique perspective on the relationship between business, people, environment, and especially every year that I would go back home to visit my family, I noticed the effects of climate change really becoming more visible, whether it was the changing rainfall or the food that we would eat that no longer could grow or the coastal erosion. Those impacts really had changes on the agriculture, the local communities. It's something that I've watched evolve, and it really created this sense of urgency for me. So sustainability wasn't really something I learned from a textbook. It's something I could see happening around me in real time in real life. And so ironically, I didn't begin my career in sustainability. I worked in the biotech space for the first half of my career because I was really fascinated by science and innovation. I've always believed that technology had the power to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. I worked in the stem cell therapy, in vitro fertilization world for some time. And it was in that last role that I had, and it had the biggest impact on me, where I was leading strategic partnerships across Europe, Middle East, Africa, India. I was working across, over 50 countries and helping them expand businesses into those new markets. But what really changed was not just the market expansion, it was actually the sustainability aspect of things, for shipping very sensitive product to those regions. And so, one of the projects I worked on was how do we improve our global supply chain? How do we improve our forecasting, reducing our waste, optimizing the logistics to lower emissions? And it saved the company a significant amount of money, time, and improved our relationship with our clients. So for me, that was like that light bulb moment. I realized that sustainability wasn't just about protecting the environment. When it's done well, it's actually really good business. So reducing waste improves margins, improves efficiency, it builds a resilient supply chain. And that's really when I realized I needed to do more than just at the company I was. So that's when I joined the UN Global Compact, which is the corporate sustainability initiative of the UN, because I really wanted to elevate how I could contribute to improving sustainability worldwide. I had the opportunity to work with Forbes 2000s, Fortune 500s, governments, NGOs, business leaders from around the world, helping them integrate sustainability into their strategy, operations, and stakeholder engagement. And it was then that I realized too, because I was actually focused more on the emerging markets, so Asia, Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, that it wasn't just them that needed help. It was also the Western companies, in Western Europe and the United States that may claim that they were sustainable, but there was this huge gap in data, between them and their supply chain. And also regulations were starting to come out. Working at the UN, we were instrumental in aiding the EU and the US and other countries on implementing regulations. And I knew that they were coming. So with supply chains not being transparent, I realized that I needed to start improving that data. And so at Bloomberg is where I went. I started leading their global supply chain data team and their ESG data team and helping build data and analytics and products around ESG risks and supply chain beyond the use of just the investors, but also for companies who are going to need it down the line for their reporting. And, as the data got better, I realized, okay, we're in this decade of action. People need to actually leverage tools at scale to make change. And that's when I went over to IBM. IBM acquired Envisi at the time, which is a reporting platform. And that's actually where Joe and I met. We
Mm-hmm.
were we
Mm-hmm.
were part of the founding Tiger team at IBM for their sustainability software portfolio, and where we basically helped them scale sustainability technology with their, their large book of business. And there I'm going to stop so I can have Joe talk about his journey,
Yeah,
and then
no,
also how we came together.
exactly. No, I appreciate that, Amir. And as she alluded to, IBM is where our stories converge. But similarly to Amira's upbringing, I grew up with a very strong connection to nature. I was born and raised on Oahu in Hawaii, and ever since being a young kid, spending time in the mountains, on the beach, in the ocean, felt and knew the importance of living in a beautiful environment that was conducive to a comfortable human kind of existence, and that was just an influence from childhood that I can't claim to draw a straight line between that and where I am today, but it's certainly been part of the reason for my personal kind of passion around sustainability and building a regenerative economy. And so skip ahead a couple years, maybe a couple decades. I ended up in North Carolina for school, and after graduating, started real estate investing and became a general contractor. And through that business, really started focusing on green building practices, in every project I did, and began thinking more and more about addressing climate change and the climate crisis in a meaningful way, and realized it wasn't going to happen one house at a time, one building at a time, but it really had to be systematic solutions applied to the underlying issues that were fundamentally creating humanity's pollution problem, whether it's carbon emissions, whether it's physical waste, whether it's polluting the waters, right? Most of the climate crisis comes back to pollution from humanity, right? And so when I really began to think about the issues in kind of a first principles perspective, realized that needed to be able to scale up my own personal impact, right? If I'm going to spend most of my working life on a particular topic, it needs to fundamentally move the needle. And two, one person's not going to be able to address every problem. So how do you, one, enable others, collaborate with others, but also maximize the impact from the labor that you're able to give, right? And that's what brought me to the technology side of sustainability, because technology is an incredible amplifier, right? Even during my time in the software space, I would say software is not a silver bullet. Software is not going to solve the problem. It's just a great tool to help people who are working in that space. And so I joined Measurable, carbon accounting and ESG reporting platform for the commercial real estate space, which was an incredible intersection of both, kind of my professional experience in building and real estate investing, and my personal, focus on implementing sustainable solutions. And during my time there, my official title was, kind of managing their global ecosystem of partners, but the role I was really passionate about was being the co-chair of their ESG committee. And as many sustainability professionals might recognize, your first step, your first foray into sustainability is also oftentimes just raising your hand and saying, hey, this is something I care about. This is something our organization should do. And I want to be a part of the work to make our community a better place. And so we had the opportunity to do the first carbon, kind of organizational wide carbon accounting, publish our first ESG report, establish a 1% pledge, and kind of implement a lot of internal programs as well, like a composting program, employee travel policy, right? Really just getting my hands dirty with what it meant to stand up a sustainability program, set policy, the fundamental and kind of technical details of carbon accounting, and the kind of complex world of ESG reporting, both voluntary and kind of mandatory. And from there was recruited to join, right, IBM's sustainability Tiger team, and that's where I met Amira, and our stories kind of reconvene, is working with IBM's largest clients to help them think through how they're implementing technology to drive efficiency and ultimately deliver kind of sustainable impacts across their organization, both supply chain, operations, facilities. And during our tenure at IBM, we had the chance to go to COP28 in Dubai, where we spent 2 weeks talking with business leaders, heads of state, kind of political representatives who were all on board. And we heard wonderfully ambitious commitments to addressing problems, deploying capital, but we felt there was a missing link between the ambition and the action, and really having tangible solutions that could be implemented and scaled at a global level to fundamentally address these issues. And so that was the kernel of what became Planet Earth Partners, was that commitment and that drive to focus on the solutions, right? To really create meaningful, tangible kind of solutions to underlying problems. And one of those actually was an idea that Amira shared with me during our time at COP28, which really got my gears turning and got me super excited about something we're actually still working on today.
Yeah, so Joe was talking about Landfill OS, and that's honestly growing up in the Gambia, there was this landfill that was situated directly across the SOS Children's Village, which is an orphanage, partly amongst other things. But I grew up witnessing this huge dump site or landfill right across an orphanage where a lot of children would actually go to pick trash. And it was something that I felt, I needed to do something at some point, and obviously I didn't do anything while I was a child, but when I was doing my MBA, and I took the entrepreneurship track, executive MBA, it was the first idea that I proposed to the team that I was with. I was like, we need to create something that can clear out landfills because, and not just in the Gambia, right? Global waste is a growing problem around the world. Landfills are running out of space. They're being covered up. They're not, being taken care of well enough. And they're honestly gold mines, literally gold mines. And so I had this idea of why don't we use these landfills as mining sites and be able to excavate, whether it's the metals, the plastics, turn the organic waste into fertilizer, literally reuse every component of waste. The team that I was working with was like, Amira, that's too big. Let's just focus on something small. This is just an MBA. I'm like, wow, I am on the wrong team. Like this is, I mean, but anyway, that was the origin story. And I actually told Joe while we were at COP28, I was like, what about this? And Joe was like, this is music to my ears.
No, it really was. And not only was it music to my ears because it was, I mean, made complete sense, but also because it was similar to like a laundry list, like a notebook full of ideas that
Yeah.
I'd been jotting down for, years at this point. And I started sharing some of my ideas, and Amira had a dozen other that she had as well. And so we spent the 2 weeks, just kind of spitballing and brainstorming. And, we left COP28 with, a shared commitment to, really build a lot of what we were talking about during our time, at the UN's climate conference. And we started out trying to vet ideas and choose one or choose the other. And it got to the point where we kind of had a sudden realization that there was no one solution to such a multifaceted problem like climate change. And we both felt the need to kind of have our hands in different parts of the problem to make sure that we were advancing and driving impact across all different arenas. And that's what led us to Planet Earth Partners, right, which is a impact investment firm and venture studio where we both back and build companies, kind of building innovative climate solutions across renewable energy and circular supply chains, right? What we really see as the foundation and the infrastructure of a regenerative economy, right? We want to build a platform that other businesses can operate and scale on top of. And so we really consider ourselves the infrastructure layer for the, kind of new green economy. And that has led us to so many exciting, entrepreneurs in the space, other folks working towards these objectives. And from our perspective, it's the more the merrier, right? It is, we are all working towards one goal. And so for that reason, we've started PEPtalk to share the stories of others, kind of doing incredible work to keep you all up to date on what we're building and what we're doing. And then just do some deep dives on sustainability topics that may have multiple layers to them, right? To make sure that everyone is, fully aware of all the kind of variables that go into trying to be a, kind of responsible, healthy, and sustainable consumer and just citizen of the world. And so we're really excited to share more about what we've been building, and we're happy to kind of get the ball rolling with just an introduction of ourselves, who we are, and what we're working on. So this is just the beginning.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for our very first episode. And, hope this gave you a little insight on who we are and why we're so passionate about the future of sustainability, technology, and innovation. Starting next week, we'll be breaking down, the bigger stories, that's really shaping our world. And we hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you.